Well, because most of the American news media cannot deal with the possibility that everyone in the Trump White House is lying to them most of the time or even all of the time, they reported as fact that Donald Trump left Canada in the middle of the night last night and flew all night from Alberta back to Washington, D.C., quote, to deal with the rapidly escalating conflict between Iran and Israel. The New York Times reported that as fact. The reason Donald Trump left Canada in the middle of the night was to deal with the war between Israel and Iran. The New York Times could have said, White House officials say that that's the reason Donald Trump left Canada in the middle of the night. And that would be a big difference from just stating it as a fact. And this is not just a semantic point. Donald Trump is a pathological liar who told over 30,000 documented lies in his first presidency, and everyone working for Donald Trump in the White House is there because Donald Trump knows that they are all willing, ready, and eager to lie for him about anything, including why he left Canada in the middle of the night. Because we know Donald Trump has no idea what to do about the new war in the Middle East. We don't know. We really don't know why he left Canada. It might have been for the reason that the New York Times thinks is a fact. And it doesn't really make any difference what time zone Donald Trump's in or what countries he's in when he's trying to do something he doesn't know how to do, like deal with the situation in the Middle East. Donald Trump has absolutely no mental capacity whatsoever to deal with a situation like this. And Donald Trump is the laziest person ever elected to the presidency. And I'm still willing to grant that it's a possibility that Donald Trump left Canada for the reason the New York Times takes to be fact. But it is an interesting coincidence that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky arrived in Canada right after Donald Trump left. And Donald Trump knew exactly when President Zelensky was arriving. President Zelensky went to Canada to ask the G7 allies for more help fighting Vladimir Putin, who Donald Trump called a genius when Vladimir Putin launched his war on Ukraine. And Donald Trump, he didn't have to hear a word from President Zelensky because he left Canada in the middle of the night. Donald Trump has all but publicly admitted that he has no idea what to do about Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine, except to, in effect, encourage Vladimir Putin to just hang on long enough, and the United States will just abandon Ukraine. Meetings in the Situation Room in the White House are usually secret. No one had any idea that there was a meeting in the Situation Room in the White House when President Obama and his national security team were tracking the Navy SEALs who were on their way to capture or kill, and it turned out kill, Osama bin Laden. But today, while there was a meeting reportedly going on in the Situation Room, the Trump White House was telling the world that Donald Trump was having a top secret meeting in the Situation Room about the situation in the Middle East. This is the same president who ignores the president's daily brief that is about situations like this as they develop, including all of the president's daily briefs that lead up to situations like this. And those daily briefs are something that every other president has consumed in full. On his flight back from Canada, Donald Trump tried to compete with Utah's Republican Senator Mike Lee for the meanest reaction to the assassination of a Minnesota state legislator and her husband, and the attempted assassination of another Minnesota state legislator and his wife. Donald Trump was asked if he has called the governor of Minnesota, as is customary for every previous president of either party in situations like this since the invention of the telephone.
You know, I could be nice and cold, but why waste time?
That's another Trump lie. He could not be nice. And he has proved himself incapable of being nice by not making that phone call, along with hundreds of other not nice things he does in a typical week. We have never had a smaller mind in the White House than Donald Trump's. We've never had a more petty mind in the White House than Donald Trump's. And as far as Donald Trump wasting time, no president's time has been less serious than Donald Trump's time. Donald Trump has spent much more time on golf courses than he has spent reading anything, related to his job as president. Donald Trump is so incapable of reading that his director of national intelligence has tried to come up with video presentations of information on an iPad that mimics Donald Trump's favorite propaganda news network. But this time, Donald Trump's heartlessness has been outdone by Senator Mike Lee. Mike Lee appears to be in an agonizing mental struggle with how to be a human being. Here's a photograph of Mike Lee last night in the Senate that does not give the slightest visual indication that Mike Lee understands a word that Minnesota Senator Tina Smith is saying to him about just how horrible his social media postings have been about the assassination and attempted assassination of those Minnesota state legislators and their spouses. Mike Lee is not well. And Mike Lee does seem obsessed with mental illness to the point where we have to wonder whether he is suffering from mental illness that leaves him projecting mental illness on others. Mike Lee tweeted, "Marxism is a deadly mental illness." He tweeted that as his explanation for why the man now charged with murder and attempted murder in Minnesota did what he did. Mike Lee decided, without evidence, a couple of things. One, that the shooter is a Marxist. And here's what's wrong with that idea, according to the defendant's roommate.
I was a Trump supporter, voted for Trump. You like Trump? I like Trump. Nobody's happy with the government. Everybody's happy, not happy what this politician does or that politician does, but you don't go on a shooting spree. It's just, that's why I hate even talking about it, because it's so crazy.
And when Mike Lee says that Marxism is a deadly mental illness, he's making it very clear that he has no idea what mental illness is. He also doesn't appear to know that Marxism does not exist as a governing doctrine in any country in the world. Marxism is a long-dead philosophy that explains nothing about life in the United States or death in the United States at the hands of an accused assassin whose roommate says voted for Donald Trump. After Senator Smith confronted Mike Lee more than 24 hours ago, Mike Lee did nothing. Mike Lee did not delete his tweets about those murders and attempted murders. Mike Lee is suffering from some very bad coverage in local Utah media. The Salt Lake Tribune reports that Mike Lee, quote, has averaged more than 100 posts a day on the platform over the last several months. 100 tweets a day is not healthy. No United States senator actually doing the job of senator would have the time for 100 tweets a day or even 10 tweets a day. So there's something seriously wrong with Mike Lee. He can't possibly be coming close to doing the job of United States senator. The very first tweet that the very sick Mike Lee issued after those deadly news bulletins from Minnesota was, "My guess is he's not MAGA." That was Detective Mike Lee's guess about the shooter. He's not MAGA. We now know that the suspected shooter voted for Donald Trump. We know the suspected shooter is MAGA. But why would anyone need to guess immediately after the shooting like this about the politics of the shooter? The shooter was on the run when Mike Lee was guessing that he's not MAGA. Mike Lee didn't care about the two issues that mattered the most at that time: sympathy for the victims and pursuit of the shooter. Why would a United States senator need to guess about the shooter being MAGA or not being MAGA? No Democratic senator tweeted, "I guess he's MAGA." But when you're a Twitter junkie like Mike Lee, out of control, tweeting 100 times a day, you're guessing about a lot of stuff. Mike Lee proudly proclaims, his Senate website proudly proclaims that he is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and served a 2-year mission for the church in the Texas Rio Grande Valley. There is nothing in Mike Lee's religion that told him to guess about the shooter's politics. Mike Lee did not come close to living Mormon ideals in his Twitter madness about these murders and attempted murders. During the weekend manhunt for the suspect in this murder and attempted murder case, Mike Lee decided to blame the Democratic governor of Minnesota for the murder and attempted murder of Democratic state officials by calling it, quote, nightmare on Wall Street. He also posted, quote, this is what happens when Marxists don't get their way. And today, 4 days later, Mike Lee deleted those tweets after Minnesota's senior senator, Amy Klobuchar, complained to him directly about his tweets. But Mike Lee, who has obviously not turned to religion for guidance in this situation, refused to apologize to anyone for any of his tweets.
I don't think this is a person who's used to being confronted. I don't think he's somebody who's used to being challenged, and I think he didn't quite know what to do. I approached him from a position of respect and wanting him to understand what I thought, and he didn't have that much to say.
He didn't even apologize to you in that interaction?
I mean, he said, how many times have we heard the words that go something like, I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings, or I'm sorry if you didn't understand what that's not, in my mind, taking accountability or responsibility for your actions. And so I can't paraphrase exactly what he said, but that was the gist of it.
Mike Lee is a disgrace. He is a disgrace to the Senate. He is a disgrace to Utah. He owes the voters of Utah who sent him to the Senate an apology for his ugly tweets, his perverse tweets. He owes the nation an apology. He owes Minnesota an apology. He owes them an apology for tweeting 100 times a day, an apology for not doing his job. Mike Lee is not up for re-election until 2028, so he is very likely to continue handling this situation in the most cowardly possible way, which is running away from reporters, forcing his staff to hold up the stuff they're carrying, to try to block the camera's view of Mike Lee like he's a gangster. There it is. The gangster leaving the courthouse shot. Try to block the camera. Before Trumpism took over the Republican Party, a United States senator would be censured for what Mike Lee did. The United States Senate would unanimously pass a resolution censuring a senator who publicly joked about assassinations and attempted assassinations. Last night, Jon Stewart shared a story about Mike Lee when Jon Stewart was lobbying for benefits for 9/11 first responders.
We had a team of Feel Good Foundation and a team of first responders with us. Firefighters, cops, other people. One of the cops had been in the first tower when it collapsed, right? So all these first responders are going around the table, and they are sharing their stories to try and get Senator Mike Lee to support this bill that's going to provide life-saving coverage and money to the victims of this terrible terrorist attack and the illnesses they are suffering since then. When the one cop says his story about being in the tower that collapsed and the aftermath, when he told Senator Lee about that experience, Senator Lee smiled and said, I bet you've got a lot of stories. Of like what? Spring break? Like, what are you talking about? We met a lot of people in Washington. Some were hopeful, some of those meetings. Some were upsetting meetings. That was the only meeting where we all walked out and looked at each other and went, what the is wrong with that guy? The only one. I say this for context, for why I use Senator Lee as the avatar for the insanity of this moment.
Mike Lee, the avatar for the insanity of this moment.
City Controller Brad Lander, who's also currently a candidate for mayor, was in Manhattan to escort several immigrants from a federal building. He has been doing this for weeks now, by the way. Like I said, he's going to join me on set in just a moment. Today, when federal agents in plain clothes tried to arrest one of those immigrants he was escorting, Lander locked arms with the immigrant and just demanded to see a warrant for the man's arrest.
Can I see the judicial warrant? You have the warrant. You don't have a warrant. I will let go when you show me the judicial warrant. Where is it? Sir, I have it in my hand here. You're obstructing. Sir, you're obstructing. I would let go. Let go. The warrant. Put it. Let's go. Take it. You don't have authority. You don't have authority to arrest U.S. citizens. Sir, you don't have the authority to arrest U.S. citizens. You don't have. I'm not obstructing. I'm standing right here in the hallway. I asked to see the judicial warrant. By asking for a judicial warrant, you don't have the authority to arrest U.S. citizens asking for a judicial warrant.
Look at the men who escalated that encounter, who handcuffed and arrested Lander in that way. As one Reuters reporter, Michael Derby, later asked, based on how these men are dressed, how would you know who they are working for, what their authority is? DHS claimed on social media New York City Controller Brad Lander was arrested for assaulting law enforcement and impeding a federal officer. But we all saw the footage. That did not happen. In fact, according to the fantastic nonprofit reporting outlet The City, who was there in the hallway at the time, one of the reporters in the room, quote, had overheard one agent say to another minutes before Lander's arrest, "Do you want to arrest the controller?" Okay? This is what the beginnings of a police state looks like, what it sounds like. And here's the thing to understand. Donald Trump's campaign promise of mass deportations of millions, 10 to 13 million people, was always fundamentally a totalitarian project. There is simply no way to pull it off but to construct a police state that doesn't just create misery and suffering for immigrants. It fundamentally must also be an existential threat to American democracy. And we're at the very beginning of this project, and look what it looks like already. And I'm joined now by New York City Controller, mayoral candidate Brad Lander, in his first TV interview since being released from detention just a little while ago. Good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
How are you feeling?
Whew, I feel angry. I feel sad. I wanted to see Edgardo be able to get out of the building. I'm going to be fine. I lost a button on my jacket, but I've got a good lawyer. I'll sleep in my bed tonight. He's in ICE detention. He has no lawyer. He's been stripped of status and due process.
So when you talk, what were you doing? In what building was it, and what were you doing in that hallway with him?
Yeah, so that was what we call the Federal Building, 26 Federal Plaza, and there's immigration hearings in it. This is the third week I've gone. And what started about 3 weeks ago is that the Department of Homeland Security has been moving essentially to strip people of their status. They were supposed to, they filed asylum applications for the most part, and they should get a hearing on whether they've got credible fear of violence or repression. Now DHS is stripping them of that. And then as soon as the case is over, they don't even know what's happening. And, you know, they don't speak English for the most part. They've had some translation. Then they walk out of the courtroom, and as they walk to the elevator, ICE agents grab them up.
So what happens is the lawyers for the government say we want to drop the case, right? Like we don't want these are people who are showing up for their court date.
Yeah, they
to be
crossed
clear.
at the border and checked in.
They checked in,
and then they got
showed
a
up at the court date. They showed up. The government says to drop it, and then the ICE folks nab them
as soon as they walk toward the elevator lobby. And so what we've been doing the last 3 weeks is observing in court, trying to advise, give them a little bit of, you should object, like you have an appeal right. And then when they walk out, we just, walk arm in arm. And 5 of the 7 families I've walked out with over the last 3 weeks, we were able to get in the elevator and exit the building, and they could go back home to their families. And they were shaking in the elevator. And when they got out, I just felt like this is what I'm supposed to be doing as an elected official who cares about the rule of law. And these are New Yorkers. But yes, then today, in two cases, a guy named Zed, who speaks Yoruba, and then Edgardo, who is in that picture. We're not so lucky.
So did they? What happened? Was Zed before this?
Zed was before.
So what
this.
happened there?
Our arms were not linked quite so tightly.
And they just grabbed
They
him.
just grabbed him.
Okay, so then this time you do link arms with Edgardo. Now I don't want to be I'm a journalist. So I have to be like very factual here. My understanding is they don't actually need a judicial warrant. They need an administrative warrant, but they can also act on probable cause. You're asking for a warrant as they're grabbing Edgardo, and what are they saying or doing?
I mean, you can see it on the video. They indicated they had a warrant, but did not show it.
Right. What do you say to people who say that they have the authority, that you're essentially obstructing the law here?
I mean, they've changed the rules until about 3 weeks ago. If you did what you were supposed to do, you would eventually get your credible fear hearing. And when the rules are changed, and even people who do what they're supposed to can't count on not being scooped up and deported, that's bad for everyone when people don't think the rules matter. And that really is what authoritarianism is, when the rules can be changed at any minute and you can't count, even if you do what you're supposed to, file your asylum application, come to court on your court date. Of course, people won't start doing that. So all we want is the due process that people are supposed to get.
So I'm struck. We played Alex Padilla. These are happening in different places in different circumstances. One is at a press conference. I'm kind of struck by how rough it is, I got to say. And partly is law enforcement officials are trained that they need to use force to subdue people, and as a sort of safety mechanism. So there is a kind of training here. But I mean, both in the case of Padilla and the case of you, it looked like you were getting kind of roughed up.
I mean, you saw it on the video, and it kept going well after we were separated.
Did it feel like you were getting roughed up?
I mean, it was, yes.
It was not gentle.
No, it was not gentle.
So then what happened after they took you, after you disappear?
Yeah.
Where do you go, and what do they tell you about why are they detaining you? What do they have you for?
So, honestly, I heard very little. And of course, the case, they have not brought charges, but apparently the U.S. Attorney's Office says they're still reviewing the case. So I don't know exactly what they will come back with. DHS put that preposterous statement out that everyone could see is not what is happening on the video. But they didn't tell me any of that. They did take me to a detention room. They took the cuffs off, and I just sat for 3.5 hours in a detention room. Part of what's fascinating is
but they didn't tell you? You're just in there, there's nothing?
Nothing.
Come on.
I'm telling you, I sat for 3.5 hours in a detention room.
But nothing. I mean, and they know exactly who you are. They know what they're doing.
They do.
They knew who you were.
They knew who I was. There's no doubt they knew I was the controller and, talked to me about that.
So, and then what happened after 3.5 hours?
Well, first I got to say about who two of the agents were, because this was kind of remarkable in itself. The arresting officer is a Pakistani Muslim who lives in Brighton Beach, and the second officer is an Indo-Guyanese immigrant who lives in South Ozone Park in Queens. Both immigrants, so...
work them over for their vote? You try to rank me, buddy?
You know it. I'm absolutely trying to get everybody's vote, including theirs. And look, we need a mayor.
Well, since I'm here.
I mean, look, immigrant New Yorkers, whoever they are, have a lot of the same issues. And some of that is affordable housing. And some of that is knowing that Donald Trump is coming for New York City. And we need elected officials who will stand up.
Well, but what do you, I want you to think of, what does that say to you, that the fact that the gentlemen that did this, that are there in immigration court, are themselves immigrants?
Yeah. I mean, it says to me that, what Trump is trying to do is to drive a wedge into our country. New York City, 40% of the 8 million New Yorkers are foreign-born. 50% of New Yorkers live in mixed-status households with at least one immigrant, including 1 million children. And if they think they're subject to deportation proceedings, think about what will happen. People will be afraid to come to school. People will be afraid to report crimes to the NYPD. People won't show up at their immigration hearings. So, the reason New York City is proud to have these sanctuary city laws is to say, It matters when there is rule of law and due process. Of course, it matters to the people who are seeking having their asylum cases heard, but it matters to all of us.
Can I just play devil's advocate for a second? It's pretty clear that Trump in 2024 made huge gains in predominantly immigrant neighborhoods in New York City. Like, I think the data shows that.
Yes.
And there's some data to suggest that, like, actually amongst foreign-born voters was the biggest swing constituency.
Yeah.
That maybe this is what a lot of immigrants want.
I mean, I think what authoritarians are good at is giving you someone to blame. You feel precarious. Housing is so expensive here. You think you're not going to be able to stay. And when someone tells you that it's somebody else's fault, even if it's the people who got here 10 minutes after you arrived. I used to, in the city council, represent a Bangladeshi neighborhood. And yes, when I would go out there, I would hear, we came the right way.
Yes.
But this shows there's no right way, when these folks are doing things the right way. They did what they were supposed to. Nobody's safe like that.
All right. You mentioned the statement by DHS in which they accuse you of assaulting a police officer, or a law enforcement officer. Did you assault a law enforcement officer? Okay.
No, I mean, people can see with their own eyes the video. That's the whole video that you showed.
At this very moment, as we come on the air, the Trump administration and California Governor Gavin Newsom are having it out in court. California's attorneys are asking a 3-judge panel to restore control of the 4,000 National Guard troops that the Trump administration sent to California to quell immigration protests in Los Angeles, back under the command and control of Governor Gavin Newsom. That panel paused a ruling last week from a district court judge who called Donald Trump's National Guard takeover unconstitutional and illegal. Ahead of today's hearing, Governor Newsom issued a dire warning on the stakes of all of this in an op-ed he penned for none other than Fox News. He writes this, quote, "Authoritarian regimes begin by targeting the most vulnerable, but they do not stop there. Trump and his loyalists thrive on division because it allows them to consolidate power and exert even greater control. If some of us can be snatched off the streets without a warrant, based only on suspicion or skin color, then none of us are safe. This is about far more than LA. It's about more than California. This is about all of us. It's about you." When Donald Trump asserted blanket authority to commandeer the National Guard, he made that order apply to every state in this nation. California may be the first, but it won't be the last. Other states are next. Democracy is next. That idea that Trump's autocratic tactics do not start and end in California was an idea and a message that was echoed today on the Senate floor by California Senator Alex Padilla. He emotionally recounted how he was handcuffed and removed from a press conference being held last week by DHS Secretary Kristi Noem. Watch.
You've seen the video. I was pushed and pulled, struggled to maintain my balance. I was forced to the ground. First on my knees, and then flat on my chest. And as I was handcuffed and marched down a hallway, repeatedly asking, "Why am I being detained?" Not once did they tell me why. I pray you never have a moment like this. If what you saw happen can happen when the cameras are on, imagine not only what can happen, but what is happening in so many places where there are no cameras. What's happening is not just a threat to California, it's a threat to everyone in every state.
Just as Senator Padilla was sharing that firsthand account in such emotional and stark terms on the floor of the Senate and asking the question, if it could happen with the cameras on, if it could happen to me, to whom else is it happening? We got our answer in another dramatic confrontation between Trump's immigration officials and a Democratic official opposing Trump's policies as it played out. It played out when ICE agents arrested New York City mayoral candidate and the city's current comptroller, Brad Lander, inside of an immigration court. The Department of Homeland Security confirmed Lander's arrest in a tweet in which they accuse him of assaulting law enforcement and impeding a federal officer. Here is the video of what happened.
Judicial warrant. You have a judicial warrant. You have a judicial warrant. And I see the judicial warrant. And I see the warrant. I will let go when you show me the judicial warrant. Where is it? Sir, where is the warrant? I have it in my hand here. I would like to see the warrant. Take it to see the warrant. Put it in custody. Take it right back. Take it back. Step back. You don't have authority to arrest U.S. citizens. Sir, you don't have the authority to arrest U.S. citizens.
I will let go when I see a warrant. You don't have the authority to arrest U.S. citizens. Scenes you don't see in America every day, scenes you don't see in any healthy democracy. That's where we start today, because there's another one today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. NBC News correspondent Jacob Soboroff is back with us. Also joining us, political strategist, publisher of The Bulwark, host of the Focus Group podcast, Sarah Longwell's back, and Puck News chief political columnist, MSNBC national affairs analyst, John Heilman's here. Jacob Soboroff, let me do this. I know you're in California. I know you're covering today's hearing. But let me ask you to jump on this New York story and another example of a very physical handling of a Democratic elected official. Is there ICE guidance that says stop at nothing to apprehend anyone, including Democratic elected officials?
Obviously, what Tom Homan said to me, Nicole, was that anybody, in his opinion, who steps between enforcement operations and ICE carrying out the largest mass deportation effort in American history, which is a huge departure from precedent under Democratic and Republican administrations, is at risk. And that departure includes showing up in court where immigrants who are coming to this country and have ongoing court cases are going to do the right thing. They're showing up in court to say, I'm here for my check-in. I'm here to have my case adjudicated. I want to stay in the United States for whatever that reason might be. It might be violence. It might be persecution. It might be food insecurity. It might be fleeing a danger for their family. And the idea that in court right now, where this situation played out in New York City, ICE agents are showing up in the hallways targeting immigrants trying to go through the process as they should is the departure here. And Tom Homan has brought his philosophy, if you stand in the way of our unprecedented immigration enforcement operation, which is now targeting quote-unquote collateral arrests, people, by the way, who may not have criminal convictions or are the worst of the worst or are dangerous, you're going to get arrested. And that's what we saw play out in New York today.
What's interesting, Jacob, and you had the first interview with Senator Padilla, is that while the American people rejected what they saw, it was not popular, they've doubled down. They, ICE or Trump or whomever is calling the shots, like the optics of manhandling a Democratic elected official at Kristi Noem's press conference. There have been some reporting that perhaps that wasn't necessarily something everybody was comfortable with, but clearly they were.
Remember what she said at the press conference, which I think gets lost in the takedown of Senator Padilla, who himself is the son of Mexican immigrants, by the way, everybody should remember, and is a historic elected official here in the city of Los Angeles and in the state of California as the first Latino senator, first Latino president of the city council here in Los Angeles. Kristi Noem said she was coming to L.A. to liberate the city from the socialists. It wasn't to crack down on the most violent criminal offenders who entered the country without authorization. It was, quote unquote, a liberation of Los Angeles. I've been on the streets of Los Angeles virtually every day since these enforcement operations started last Friday. The city of Los Angeles is a peaceful city. In fact, while listening to this court case today and listening to the Trump administration describe the scene outside the courthouse, I want to make sure I get this right. To protect the federal building as 1,000 sustained ongoing mob violence. 1,000 protesters were engaged in sustained ongoing mob violence. Were trying to breach the building. We have the video. I was standing there for hours. I was on the air with you. We were talking to Ross the Marine Corps veteran who was there to peacefully protest the current Marine Corps having to stand outside the building. There was no violence of the sort. So this sort of underlying pretext to engaging in these operations, I can tell you from my perspective as a journalist, I can tell you based on what I'm hearing inside that courtroom today, what the federal government is telling the court about what happened outside that courthouse on Saturday as justification for taking over Gavin Newsom's National Guard is just not true. And I'm telling you that because I saw it with my own eyes.
Yeah, it's amazing when you see the anatomy of the lies as they're crafted. I mean, we had the benefit of watching Kristi Noem's press conference where she tells her first lie at 3 p.m. Eastern about Senator Padilla not identifying himself when the tape had emerged 30 minutes earlier with him identifying himself. Explain this hearing. This is, so Donald Trump loses in court. The judge is Judge Breyer. He rules against Donald Trump and in favor of the state of California. What is today's hearing? How is it going? And what happens next?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the case, the governor's office and the Attorney General of California, Rob Bonta, first took this case to the Northern District of California to Judge Breyer, who seemed to indicate he was going to, side on the side of the government. The government's argument, and Gavin Newsom previewed this when he and I talked live on Sunday night, 2 Sundays ago on MSNBC, sort of at the height of the ICE operations getting underway. He said that the federal government had usurped his authority. He said specifically they never coordinated with the governor of the state, which under statute, the state is arguing, even if the president of the United States wanted to engage in this unprecedented takeover, usurpation of the authority of the governor, taking 4,000 National Guard troops and putting them under federal authority, the federalization of the National Guard, which, by the way, is taking away National Guard troops 3/4 of the rattlesnake teams that are mitigating potential fire danger at the height of wildfire season in California, and taking counter-narcotic officers, National Guard troops that were part of task force at the border going after drug cartels off of their duty to bring them to the streets of California. Governor Newsom's argument is that is against, even though there's Title 10 of the U.S. Code, and that's what they're exercising here, it requires you to coordinate with the governor's office, and you did nothing of the sort. And so that's the crux of the argument here, which is there is no authority for the president to do this. He didn't do it in the right way, even if he wanted to try to attempt to do this in the right way. And so now it's time for you to return jurisdiction over those National Guard troops to me, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, so I can put them actually to good use for my state. And it's me who knows what our state needs. Our local elected officials know what our state needs. And the mayor of Los Angeles doesn't want those troops there better than you, Mr. President.
This is what you had to say to your colleagues today about what the president is doing. Take a listen.
To my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, are we truly prepared to live in a country where the president can deploy the armed forces to decide which duly elected governors and mayors should be allowed to lead their constituents? Is that really the precedent that we're okay with setting?
Adam Sir hit the nail on the head with exactly what you were saying today in his piece about the tyrant test. He writes it would be absurd to say that American presidents have always been principled defenders of freedom and democracy, but their long shared bipartisan definition of tyrant is one who oppresses his own, a leader who uses military force to suppress their political opposition, forfeits the right to govern. You could call this the tyrant test, and Trump is already failing it. It is astonishing that it's like we're the frog in a boiling pot of water, and the heat just keeps getting turned up, and we don't realize, a lot of us, what's happening.
Yeah. So, a couple of pieces here. Number one, it's always easy to put this back in perspective if you flip the question around. Imagine if President Biden did something that Donald Trump did. What would Republicans say then? Right? A president of the United States suggesting, no. That governor, that mayor, no, we have to liberate that city. I mean, that's exactly the rhetoric that compelled me to speak at the press conference last week, not just as a senator, but as an American, number one. Number two, when they suggested that the mission of the military was to go in and do the liberty, that is not what Marines are trained to do. That is not what they can fight wars overseas, but you don't use them against your own people. And so that was my appeal to my colleagues. is this the precedent that we're saying? Are you okay with this? Because I'm not. This is not normal, and we should not treat it as normal.
So, Senator, where do you see things now? How do we move from your incident and the one we saw today with Brad Lander, and who himself noted that he was just there to accompany defendants and advocate for a due process for those defendants. You were in that federal building there again to take care of other business, but happened to have the secretary down the hall and say, okay, let me go stop in and listen, and then wanted to address what was being said and was summarily handcuffed out of the building. How do we move forward from here? Because my sense is there's only one ear open to this. The other ear is shut. As you noted at the beginning with your first comments that, a handful of Republicans showed up. But to be clear, whether it is the assassination of state officials in Missouri or Minnesota, or the arrest of a United States senator, there is no compelling argument from the other side to say this is not who we are. This should not stand. Even though it's happening with Trump, you don't have to call him out if you don't want to, but at least address the moment in front of us.
So I think there's a couple of things. First of all, not surprised because let's just do a little play-by-play. On Thursday, what happened to me. Come Friday, there was an announcement that the president was directing DHS to let up on enforcement in hotels and agricultural fields and restaurants. And we thought, oh, maybe there's a glimmer here. Maybe there's a baby step in the right direction. Oh, by Friday, that was all gone.
Right.
Like, no. Not only are we restoring that, we're doubling down in blue cities is what he said. So the clear partisan political attack, he's saying the quiet part out loud. And so while we try to appeal to our Republican colleagues, we know that what will really move them is the people. And one of the best things that has happened over the last several days is the millions of people who came out across the country on Saturday. By and large, very, very peaceful, but you can't deny the numbers. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle cannot deny the numbers.
And they came out in red cities and red counties.
Every state in the country. And once they see that, look, Donald Trump, he may be there his 4-year term, but at some point that's going to come to an end.
Right.
The people ain't going nowhere.
Right.
And so my big message is for the general public, please stay engaged. Donald Trump would like nothing more than for us to be fearful and stay quiet, for us to cower and stay home. No, we have to continue to defend our First Amendment rights by exercising our First Amendment rights. Be peaceful, but stay loud. Keep the faith, but keep organizing it, whether it's marching in the streets, whether it's calling your congress member's office, whether it's showing up at City Hall during public comment, whether it's registering your neighbors to vote and getting ready for the election next year. Everybody can do something.
And that sentiment was echoed today by New York City Comptroller and mayoral candidate Brad Lander. I want you to take a listen, Senator, to what he had to say.
We are not going to allow Donald Trump to wreck the rule of law, to deny people due process, and to turn our country into something that doesn't meet its obligations under international law. And so I just engaged in that tradition of accompaniment, of trying to bear witness, of trying to walk peacefully with someone, of trying to make sure that the rules are followed.
Echoes of what you said there, right? Which is, this isn't just about you. It's not just about immigration. It is about the very foundations of our democracy. And I wonder what it is going to take for that message to permeate, especially because, as you know better than anyone, Senator, there is so much noise right now coming from this administration on immigration, the way they are defining what they mean by criminality when it comes to immigrants, the fact that they are going after people in their workplaces, whether that be fields or factories. It seemed for a moment as though we were seeing a 180 from this administration in terms of who they were prioritizing. Already, the most nativist elements of this administration have them back on track, going after the people who harvest the things that we enjoy on our dinner table every night. They themselves, Senator, they don't know where they are on this issue. Where then is there an opportunity for Democrats to really lead the way?
Yeah. Well, we're beginning to see some unity amongst Democrats around a positive agenda, because it can begin with calling upon Donald Trump to withdraw the military from the streets of Los Angeles. You know, what they've done in Los Angeles is sort of paved the way for them to do the exact same thing in communities across the country, and it's wrong. Every single Democratic senator has joined me in that call. Every single Democratic governor has joined me in that call, because they know the stakes. And again, the stakes are far beyond just immigrant law enforcement and immigrant rights. Any of our fundamental rights can be challenged. Donald Trump will do whatever he can to suppress political opposition. He knows no bounds. He thinks he's all powerful. And so when the people rise up, the people stand up. That's been the history of our country. People will rise up, stand up, peacefully protest, change the political climate, and insist on change from Congress. And Congress, sometimes it takes a minute, but they get there. We've seen it in civil rights, we've seen it in voting rights, we've seen it in so many other areas, and this is one of those moments.
It's only been 6 months. It hasn't even been 6 months, actually. Okay, it ain't even the 20th. What concerns you most about the next 6 months?
About the next 6 months, that this president will continue to think his power is unchecked, right? Can't speak for the judiciary. There's been a lot of reasons to be concerned about the judiciary, but even at district court levels, he's losing a whole lot of federal cases. And in some cases, they're appealing. In some cases, they're just ignoring and continuing to not comply. And so while we work to buttress the judiciary to rein that in, again, it's not that complicated. There's another co-equal branch of government in the U.S. Capitol. It's called Congress. Happens to be Republican majority at the time. They swore an oath, to become a House representative in the House or a senator, to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Are you going to do it or not? What's it gonna take? When is enough enough? When is too much too much?
For the past 5 days or so, since Israel launched attacks against Iran, and Iran responded in kind with their own attacks against Israel, there has been this growing list of questions, I'm sure you have them too, and concerns about what is actually going on and what still might happen over the next few months, days, or even hours. I mean, last week at the onset of the strikes, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said explicitly that Israel's objective was to take out Iran's nuclear capabilities. However, since then, the Israeli military seems to have widened its targets, striking Iran's oil and gas refineries and killing much of the leadership and intelligence officers inside Iran's Revolutionary Guard. Netanyahu has notably not ruled out any actions that would bring about regime change in Iran, and that has set off alarm bells and raised the specter of the United States officially joining Israel in this war. And fears about that prospect are not at all unfounded. I mean, just today, Reuters reported that the U.S. military has begun bolstering its forces in the Middle East, including sending more fighter jets to the region. So now the bigger question is this. What exactly is Trump's endgame in all of this? Because it's going to impact all of us. Because remember, for years, Trump has branded himself as an anti-war peacemaker. He's repeatedly claimed that he was always against the war in Iraq, right from the start, which is a total lie. But in 2016, Trump stood out, partly because he said stuff like this.
Obviously, the war in Iraq was a big, fat mistake. The war in Iraq, we spent $2 trillion, thousands of lives. We don't even have it. We should have never been in Iraq. We have destabilized the Middle East.
Now, Trump continued branding himself as a peacemaker in his first term and ran on that message in the 2024 election, where he reiterated time and again that he's not only against the ongoing wars taking place around the globe, but that he would use the power of the presidency to stop them.
Upon taking office, I will also restore peace through strength. I will get that war in Ukraine settled so fast.
I'll get that war settled before I even become president.
I want to see the Middle East get back to peace, and real peace, but a peace that's going to be a lasting peace. We will measure our success not only by the battles we win, but also by the wars that we end, and perhaps most importantly, the wars we never get into. My proudest legacy will be that of a peacemaker and unifier. That's what I want to be, a peacemaker and a unifier.
A peacemaker and a unifier. Not exactly the words I would use at any point in time during his presidency, either one or his public life. But that aside, fast forward to last week. And within an hour of Israel attacking Iran last Thursday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio released this statement. We are not involved in strikes against Iran, and our top priority is protecting American forces in the region. Let me be clear, Iran should not target U.S. interests or personnel. The Trump administration, loud and clear, declared that the U.S. had zero involvement in this dramatic escalation. But that arm's length distance only lasted a few hours. Until Friday morning, when Trump, the peacemaker, self-described again, started to send a different message, that Israel's attacks against Iran were excellent and that there was more to come. Fast forward again to yesterday. After a bloody weekend of crossfire between Israel and Iran, Trump abruptly left the G7 summit in Canada a day early, announcing in advance, posting an ominous message online that appeared to suggest more carnage was to come, simply stating, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. I said it over and over again. Everyone should immediately evacuate Tehran. Evacuate Tehran? I mean, it's a city of 9 million people where tens of thousands of civilians are already struggling to evacuate. Got it. And Trump continued his escalations today, posting again online, this time using the pronoun we when describing Israel's apparent success in targeting Iran. He also threatened to kill Iran's supreme leader, or didn't take it off the table, I guess is a way to describe it. Now, there's a very real issue at hand here that goes beyond rhetoric. Israel ultimately wants the U.S. to join this war because they want to attack what's considered the heart of Iran's nuclear program, the Fordo nuclear fuel enrichment plant, which is heavily fortified, built into a mountain. It's deep inside of a mountain, which means only a 30,000-pound American-made bomb carried by an American B-2 stealth bomber can even attempt to reach Fordo.